She never crossed the line. She needs you to know that first. Nothing happened, not physically, not in the way that leaves a clear before and after. But something happened, something that scared her more than she knew how to say, something that made her realize, in the middle of an ordinary conversation with someone who was not her husband, that her heart had already started walking toward a door it was never supposed to open. She caught herself. She stepped back. And then she did the hardest thing she has ever done in her life. She told him, and everything fell apart. This is the story of what happened after, of a marriage that came to the edge and looked over, of two people who had every reason to walk away and chose, at great cost, with great pain, to stay. This is a story about the grace of God in the most broken place a marriage can be. If your marriage has ever come close to an edge, if you have ever stood in the wreckage of something you caused or something that was done to you, this story is for you. God is not finished. He has never once been finished with a marriage that still has two people willing to fight for it. She had carried it for 3 weeks. Not well. She had carried it the way you carry something that is too heavy in the wrong shape, awkwardly, constantly aware of it, unable to put it down and unable to keep holding it. She had told herself she didn't need to say anything, that nothing had happened, that it was over now, and she had ended it, and the kindest thing she could do for her marriage was to never mention it. But every time Marcus looked at her, she felt it. The weight of something he didn't know, the gap between what he thought was true and what actually was. She couldn't live in that gap anymore. So one night, the kids in bed, the house quiet, her hands around a mug she wasn't drinking from, she looked at him across the kitchen table, and she told him there had been someone, not an affair. She was clear about that. Nothing physical had happened. No line had been crossed in the way that people usually mean when they say that word. But she told him that someone from her past had come back into her life, that they had been talking, that she had looked forward to the conversations in a way she knew was wrong, that somewhere in the middle of feeling invisible in her own marriage, she had let herself be seen by someone who should not have been seeing her. She told him that her heart had gone somewhere it was never supposed to go, that she had known it for weeks, that she had ended it, that she was telling him because she refused to build the rest of their marriage on a secret. She told him everything, and then she waited. He didn't say anything for a long time. She watched him receive it, watched the information land on him like something physical, the slight flinch, the way his jaw set, the particular stillness of a man who is holding himself very carefully together because he does not yet know what will happen if he stops. He looked at his hands. He looked at the table. He did not look at her. And in that silence, that long, terrible, necessary silence, she watched something change behind his eyes. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter and more devastating than anger. The particular kind of hurt that comes from realizing that the person you trusted most in the world has been carrying something you didn't know about, that the life you thought you were living had a version underneath it you weren't part of, that the safety you believed you had was not as complete as you thought. She watched it happen, and she knew she had done that, and she could not undo it. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. Both of them were brokenhearted that night, in different ways, for different reasons, with different griefs that would take different amounts of time to work through. But God was not closer to one of them than the other. He was close to Marcus in his devastation. He was close to Sophia in her shame. He was in the room that night, in the kitchen, in the silence, in the terrible space between two people who love each other and have just been broken open. He is close to the brokenhearted. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. Both of them qualified that night, and he was there for both of them. She wasn't looking for it. That was the truth, the whole truth, even the parts she was ashamed to say out loud. She hadn't gone looking for someone to notice her. She hadn't been planning an exit or engineering an escape. She was just a woman going through the motions of a marriage that had gotten quiet in ways she didn't know how to talk about. She was loved. She knew she was loved. But she was also invisible in the particular way a wife can be invisible inside a functioning marriage. Present, but unseen. Physically close, but emotionally unreached. And into that invisible place, someone had walked who asked how she was, who remembered things she'd said, who seemed genuinely curious about her inner life. It had felt like water in a very dry place, and she had drunk it longer than she should have. Before she understood what she was doing, before she caught herself and stopped. She wasn't looking for it. But she had been hungry enough that when it arrived, she wasn't strong enough, in that season, in that emptiness, to walk away immediately. That was the truth, all of it. Standing in the wreckage she had made, watching Marcus's face in the kitchen, sitting with what she had just done. She could finally see clearly, the way you sometimes can only see clearly when the thing you almost lost is right in front of you, and you finally understand its full value. She saw her marriage, not the distant, going through the motions version she had been living in, the real one, the one underneath all the quiet and the distance and the unspoken things. She saw Marcus, not the tired husband on the couch, not the man who had stopped asking how she was, the man she had chosen, the man who had chosen her, the man who was sitting across from her right now with everything broken open and was still there. She saw her children asleep in the next room. She saw her life, her whole, actual, precious life. And she understood with a clarity that felt like being doused in cold water exactly what she had almost done to it. Not for someone who loved her, for the feeling of being noticed. She would spend a long time sitting with that. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. James 1:14-15. The Bible does not soften this. Desire, the hunger, the longing, the need to be seen and known and wanted, is not sin in itself. But when desire is not brought to God and to the right people, it looks for somewhere else to go. It finds the nearest open door. It walks through before you realize what is happening. And by the time you understand what desire has conceived, it has already become something you have to confess. This is not a story about a bad woman. This is a story about what happens when hunger goes unaddressed for too long. And it is a story about the God who meets both the hunger and its consequences with the same unfailing grace. 3 days after the confession, Marcus packed a bag. He didn't say much. He moved through the bedroom quietly, methodically, the way a man moves when he is operating on autopilot, because feeling anything fully would break him open entirely. She watched from the doorway. She didn't try to stop him. She understood that she didn't have the right. He picked up the bag. He walked down the hallway. He got to the front door, and he stopped. He stood there for a long time with his hand on the door handle, and the bag at his feet, and the darkness outside, and the life he had built on the other side of the door behind him. She couldn't see his face. She could only see the set of his shoulders, and in those shoulders she saw everything. The grief and the fury, and the love and the confusion, and the question that had no clean answer. How do you stay when everything in you wants to leave? He didn't stay because it was easy. He stayed because of something that happened in that long moment at the door. Something he couldn't entirely explain and didn't try to. A thought. Or maybe a conviction. Or maybe the still small voice of a God who was very present in that hallway that said, "This is the moment. Not the moment to leave. The moment that will define what kind of man you are. The moment that will tell you whether the faith you've claimed your whole life is real enough to cost you something. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." He had heard those words at weddings. He had never understood them the way he understood them in that hallway. He put the bag down. He didn't go back to the bedroom. He sat in the dark living room alone for a very long time. But he stayed. The man who hates and divorces his wife, says the Lord God of Israel, does violence to the one he should protect. Malachi 2:16. God's heart is always for the covenant, not blindly, not without acknowledging the reality of pain or the legitimacy of what was broken. But God's design for marriage was always permanence, always the fighting for, always the choosing again and again of the person you stood before him with and said yes. Marcus didn't stay because God demanded it. He stayed because something in him, something shaped by years of faith and love and the life they had built, believed that the covenant was worth more than the pain. That what God had joined together was not for him to separate. Even now, even this, the weeks that followed were the quietest of their marriage. Not a healing quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of two people who are so familiar with each other that words aren't necessary. The quiet of damage. They moved through the house on parallel tracks, rarely intersecting, rarely speaking beyond the logistics of children and schedules and the ordinary maintenance of a life. She did not push. He did not reach. Both of them understood in some wordless way that the other needed space they didn't know how to give but were trying anyway. She cried in the shower most mornings. He ran longer routes than he used to. They went to church together on Sunday because that was what they had always done, and neither of them knew how to stop. They sat in the same pew, 3 inches apart, a universe between them, and still, they were both there. Nobody tells you what rebuilding actually looks like. The word itself sounds like something clean and purposeful, like two people deciding to build something new from the rubble, rolling up their sleeves, working together toward a clear goal. It doesn't look like that. It looks like a Tuesday morning where nothing is resolved, and you make coffee anyway, and you hand him a mug, and your fingers almost touch, and neither of you knows what to do with that. It looks like a therapy session where you both cry and don't look at each other and drive home in silence, but you both showed up It looks like choosing every single day not to give up, not because you feel like staying, not because you are sure it will work, but because something in you believes that the God who was present in the making of this marriage has not left the building. Rebuilding is unglamorous. It is slow. It is the opposite of dramatic. It is just two people on another ordinary Tuesday, choosing not to quit. I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten. Joel 2:25. He promised restoration, not of the old thing, the thing that had too many unspoken words in it, too much distance, too much going through the motions. That version had vulnerabilities in it that contributed to what happened. A new thing, richer for having survived what it survived. More honest because the hiding was no longer possible. More intentional because both of them now understood the cost of taking each other for granted. The locust had eaten years, but God restores, not a pale imitation, the real thing, better than what was there before. He promised. There came a day, about 2 months in, when God said something to her in prayer that she wasn't expecting. You have repented. I have forgiven you. Now stop using your guilt as a way to avoid doing the hard work of actually rebuilding. She had been apologizing every day, multiple times a day. Not because Marcus needed to hear it, he had actually asked her to stop, but because the apology had become a way of managing her own shame, a ritual that felt like penance, a way of punishing herself that she had mistaken for humility. God wasn't interested in her guilt. He was interested in her healing, and her healing and Marcus's required her to get up off the floor of shame and start doing the actual work of becoming someone her husband could trust again. Not through words, through time, through consistency, through showing up differently day after day until something new was built. She received his forgiveness, and she got up. He noticed it himself, the way he had been weaponizing her pain, the small cuts, the pointed silences, the reminders, never explicit, never direct, but present, that she had done this and he was the one who had stayed, and she owed him. He had told himself it was honest, that he was just processing, that she deserved to feel the weight of what she had done. But one morning, sitting with his Bible and a coffee he had made for one, because that was still what he did, he read something that stopped him. Love does not keep a record of wrongs, and he understood, with a clarity that was uncomfortable, that every time he wielded his pain as a weapon, he was choosing the wound over the marriage. He was not obligated to heal on her timeline, but he was choosing, every time he punished her, to keep them both stuck in the very place he claimed he wanted to leave. He put the weapon down. It cost him something. He put it down anyway. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. 1 Corinthians 13:7. Not 3 of those things. Not the ones that feel manageable, all things. This is the love that God described. This is the love that Marcus had stood before God and promised. This is the love that was being tested in the most literal possible way. Bears all things. Carries the weight of this without being crushed. Believes all things. Holds on to the possibility that what is broken can be made whole. Hopes all things. Refuses to let the worst outcome be the only outcome it can imagine. Endures all things. Stays, even now, even this. This is not a love that is easy. It is a love that is chosen. Again and again and again. until the choosing becomes something new. In the middle of all of it, the silence and the slow work and the Tuesday mornings and the therapy sessions and the moments when it felt impossibly far, God was doing something. Neither of them could see it clearly while it was happening. They were too close to the damage to see the work. But God was there. He was in the therapy sessions when words finally came out that had been locked away for years. He was in the Sunday mornings when they sat 3 inches apart and both showed up anyway. He was in the moment Marcus made her coffee and her fingers almost touched his and neither of them pulled away. He was working on both of them separately and together, breaking down what needed to break, softening what had gone hard, showing both of them the places in themselves that had contributed to where they ended up, not to assign blame equally, but because both of them needed to grow in order to build something stronger. He was there, in the middle of the mess, working, quietly, persistently, refusing to let go of either of them. 6 weeks after the night she told him, they had the first conversation that wasn't about the betrayal. It was small, completely ordinary. He mentioned something funny one of the kids had said. She laughed, a real laugh, not performed, just real. He almost smiled, and in that small, ordinary, completely unremarkable moment, they both felt it. The first hairline crack in the ice. Not a breakthrough. Not a resolution. Not the moment the movie would choose as the turning point. Just a laugh. Just a almost smile. Just 2 people in the same room, being slightly less guarded than they had been the day before. It was enough. For that Tuesday, it was enough. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Isaiah 43, 18-19. Do not dwell on the past, not pretend it didn't happen, not refuse to acknowledge the damage or skip the hard work of rebuilding. Do not dwell. Do not make your permanent residence in what was. Do not let the worst moment of your marriage become the defining story of your marriage. Because God is doing a new thing, not restoring the old thing. That old thing had cracks in it that contributed to what happened. A new thing. Something that could only come from surviving this. Something that both of them would recognize years from now as the beginning of the marriage they were actually supposed to have. New, stronger, more honest, more dependent on God than it had ever been before. See, he said, see. Because sometimes you have to be told to look for it. She learned she was capable of something she never thought she was. That was the hardest lesson, the one that required the most grace to sit with. The dismantling of the version of herself she had constructed, careful, faithful, the kind of woman who would never, and the honest reckoning with the truth that she was none of those things automatically. She was a woman, hungry and human and capable of terrible things when her needs went unmet and unspoken for long enough. She learned to bring her hunger to God before it found somewhere else to go. She learned to say the hard thing to Marcus instead of going quiet and waiting for someone else to notice. She learned that vulnerability inside a marriage is not weakness. It is the only thing that makes real intimacy possible. She learned that God's grace is bigger than the worst version of yourself. That the worst thing you have ever done is not the truest thing about you. That there is always, always a way back. She learned that at great cost. She learned that. He learned that love is a verb. He had known that in theory. He had heard it at weddings and in sermons, and had nodded along with the understanding of a man who had never had to test it at its absolute limit. He understood it now. Love is not the feeling that makes staying easy. Love is the decision to stay when the feeling is gone. Love is the choosing on the morning when the wound is fresh, on the Tuesday when nothing has been resolved, on the night when everything in you wants to leave, to stay. He learned that forgiveness is not a feeling either. It is a direction you choose to walk in, even when your emotions are walking somewhere else. And the feelings catch up, not all at once, not on your timeline, but they catch up. He learned that staying was the bravest thing he had ever done, more than anything else in his life, the bravest thing. And he learned that God meets you in the bravery, shows up in the choosing, is present in the staying. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. Romans 8:28. All things, not most things, not the things that make sense, not the things that are easy to redeem. All things, including this, including the confession at the kitchen table, including the bag in the front door, including the weeks of silence and the therapy sessions and the almost smile over something a child said. In all of it, God was working for good, for the good of two people who loved him and were trying, imperfectly and at great cost, to love each other. He promised. He keeps everyone. The marriage that came out of the fire was not the same as the one that went in. It was harder, more honest, more intentional, less willing to let things go unspoken. They had learned the hard way, the only way some things can be learned, that a marriage requires more than presence. It requires attention, curiosity, the willingness to ask the real question and wait for the real answer, the willingness to be known and to pursue knowing. They talked more than they ever had, not always easily, not always without pain, but they talked. He asked how she was, really, and waited. She told him, really, even when it was uncomfortable. They prayed together again, haltingly at first, awkwardly, and then less so. The marriage that came out of the fire was not perfect. It was better than perfect. It was real. God was not finished with their marriage. He had never been finished with it. Not on the night of the confession. Not on the night Marcus almost left. Not on the silent Sunday mornings when they sat 3 inches apart and both showed up anyway. He was not finished. And the marriage that stood on the other side of the hardest season of their lives was evidence of that. Not evidence that they were exceptional. Evidence that God is faithful, that grace is real, that what he joins together, he is willing to fight for even when both people in it have temporarily stopped fighting for each other. God was not finished with their marriage. He is not finished with yours. You are seen. You are held. You are not alone.